Hey folks, it's Chris, and today we're going to be doing a blind shootout between the Fractal FM3 and the Neural DSP Quad Cortex. This is a blind shootout, which means that while the track is playing, you won't know which of the modelers I'm using. I'm just going to show either an A or a B on the screen whenever I change between the units. For the high gain tones, I'm using a model based off of the Bogner Überschall, and for the clean tones, I'm using a model based off of the Fender Twin Reverb. As far as the signal chain, I started by recording some DI tracks and then reamped it through both of the units. All the effects processing is done inside of the box, with the exception of some compression and a little bit of GW mix-centric magic on the master bus, just to sparkle the whole thing up a bit. For guitar, I'll be using none other than the Aristides 070 with some Fishman Fluence modern pickups, so it's going to have a fairly high gain and modern tone, I hope. Just as a spoiler alert, regardless of what my opinions are in this video, both of these are fantastic units, and if you happen to get your hands on either of them, I'm sure you won't be disappointed. For me, I don't have a reason to keep both. They fill a lot of the same needs, and I don't think it makes sense for me to hang on to both of them. I'm only going to be using one of them realistically. So by the end of this video, I want to choose one to keep and one to sell. Without further ado, let's get into it. I hope you enjoyed the track. Now for the big reveal. So when you were listening to A, that was the Fractal FM3, and B was the Quad Cortex. So let's talk a little bit more about these modelers. The first thing I want to talk about is some things that they're both really good at. And the first thing that comes to mind is that they both fit in a backpack, like literally fit in a backpack. This is really helpful, regardless of whether you're playing at a coffee house or traveling internationally. Having something that can fit in your backpack versus one of these big tube heads that you need to lug around, it's a massive convenience. And yeah, the FM3 is a little bit on the heavy side, but still I would say that, you know, if you're just carrying it around for a bit, it's really not that bad, and having all of your effects and your amps in one box, it's just amazing. The second thing that's great about both of these units is the communities. Both Fractal and Neural, they both have communities that are creating presets or IRs or neural captures in Neural's case, and these are things that you can install into your modeler and get new sounds. And there are some really brilliant folks in the community that are making amazing presets and sounds. So what you're getting is not just what's in the box, you're also getting access to expansion. The third thing is, even though there's a pretty big difference in the number of effects you're getting between the FM3 and the Quad Cortex, I would argue that both of them have way more amps and effects than your average guitar player is ever going to need. And if there's something you really think you need that isn't in there, again, the communities most likely have something for it. So there are some key differences which I'd like to point out, which you may have noticed during the track. First, notice how much background noise there is here on the FM3. Versus the Quad Cortex here is much cleaner. I'm not sure why this is, because I used the gate on both of them with fairly aggressive settings, and I used the same cables for both of them, so I'm not really sure where that could be coming from other than the amp model itself. The next thing to notice is how much brighter the Quad Cortex is. Listen for the change here. Did you hear it? The difference in brightness becomes much more apparent here in the clean section. The FM3 here is fairly bright, but the Quad Cortex here, it's far glassier. It has a brilliance to it that I couldn't replicate on the FM3. So to help me decide which of these modelers to keep and which one to sell, I'm going to choose a few different categories and rate each of the modelers from 0 to 10 in those categories. These will be based completely on my opinion and mostly on my experience using them to produce the track that you heard at the beginning of this video. It is worth noting that when we're talking about as premium and high quality modelers as both of these, a lot of this comes down to personal opinion and honestly nitpicking. There are only a few aspects which would seriously sway my preference one way or the other. Alright, so the first category is sound quality, of course. I would give the Fractal FM3 a 9 out of 10, and I would give the Neural Quad Cortex a 9.5 out of 10. For the models that I chose, both the Bogner and the Fender Twin, both of these amp modelers produced really great tones in the end. The issue is that with the FM3, I had to work a bit more to get something usable, and I wasn't quite as happy with the result at the end. So first of all, as I pointed out before, there was a higher noise floor, and I'm not entirely sure where this came from because the signal chains were very similar between the two, but for some reason in the FM3 the gain just built up a lot more, and the gate wasn't able to keep it under control as well. Now this is probably just an artifact of the particular amp models that I used, but nevertheless it was an issue for me. I had to go through a lot of the signal chain and cut bass everywhere, which I thought was nuts, and even when I was finished there was still a lot of bass. The other thing is on the flip side, on the bright end, I could not make it sound quite as crisp and glassy and brilliant as the Quad Cortex, which really stood out to me in the clean section of the track. And those are basically the reasons why the Quad Cortex got a little bit higher. The sounds out of the box without much tweaking were overall, I found, much more well balanced, and there was a nice crispness to them. So they really stood out in the mix, I'd say, a little bit more. So the next category is ease of use, and this is where the Quad Cortex really shines over the FM3. I would give the Quad Cortex a 10 out of 10, and the FM3 a 7 out of 10. Now, while it's possible that you could use the hardware interface on the FM3 to create a new rig or to edit your rig or dial in some effects, I wouldn't unless I had no other choice. For me to use the FM3 properly, you really need to have the FM Edit desktop software. So that means having some external device with you. And so if I were at a gig and I needed to dial in a new tone or something, if I didn't have my computer with me, I would feel kind of nervous. But maybe that's not such a problem nowadays. Maybe folks are bringing their laptops, or maybe some of you out there are just much more savvy with it than I am. I find it pretty difficult to work with. The Quad Cortex, on the other hand, it just couldn't be any simpler. It's a super intuitive touchscreen, big bright display, drag and drop, touch swipe, etc. Everything is super simple and super clear. You can find your way around. You don't need to read the manual. You can throw that away. In every aspect, it's taking the cake for ease of use. The last category is performance ruggedness. And what I mean by this is how easy will it be to recover from a problem in a live performance, or how durable is it under the stresses of a normal performance. And in this category, I would give the Quad Cortex an 8 out of 10, and I would give the FM3 an 8.5 out of 10. So to start with, the power cable for the Quad Cortex is, I wouldn't say it's exotic by any means, but it's definitely not as common as the power cable type for the FM3. And why does this matter? Well, if you're at a gig and your power cable breaks, or if you step on it, you get a short, whatever the case may be, and you need to grab a quick replacement, it's really convenient if the power cable happens to be one that's really common. So there's a higher chance that somebody will have an extra, or that a nearby shop will have one. The other thing is that the power cable for the Quad Cortex, the connection point, it doesn't feel nearly as stable as that for the FM3, which means that it wouldn't take as much of a knock to pull the plug out while you're on stage, so you have to be more careful with it. The other big aspect, and I mean big aspect, is that the Quad Cortex's beautiful touchscreen is completely unprotected. and it is right next to the foot switches, which means that you're going to be stomping really close to it on stage. So if you happen to be a little dizzy or a little excited or whatever the case may be, your foot's probably going to land on that screen once in a while. Now the unit looks really strong, but I just wouldn't feel that good about accidentally stomping on the screen once in a while. So that's something that I'm actually a little bit nervous about when I go to try using it in a real live setting. The FM3, on the other hand, it has these protective bars right next to the screen so that if your foot comes close to it, you'll probably hit the bar and not the screen. Before we get to a final verdict, I want to say a little bit about the Quad Cortex being such a new product. At the beginning of this video, I mentioned that I used a tone resembling Bogner Überschall. Well, if you look at Neural DSP's announcement about which amps were supposed to be in the first version of the software, you'll notice that the Bogner Überschall and the Bogner Shiva were both on that list. So I was very confused when I couldn't find them in the in the unit. I searched quite a while. I tried some other tones that I thought maybe this is it, but I couldn't find them. And then I, of course, found a later article where they retracted those two models. They said that they had to take some models out from the first version of the software. Fortunately, they had provided some neural captures of both the Überschall and the Shiva, but the Überschall captures did not work very well for me. They sounded very, very different from what was in the FM3, and honestly, the two were not even comparable. I ended up using a Bogner Fish neural capture. I think Fish comes from the other code name, which was Vishnu, which is based on Shiva, Vishnu, Fish. Yeah, anyway, point being, yes, it's a pretty new product and a fairly new company, and the roadmap, it may change. And as the saying goes, you need to buy what's there today, don't buy the promises of the future, because they may or may not come. That said, for me, the Neural DSP Quad Cortex is still the winner. Even though there are far fewer effects and amps in the box for the Quad Cortex, for me, it's way more than enough already. And if I need more, I can get new presets and neural captures from the community. So I really feel like I'm more than covered. Between that, the sound quality being so good, the utilities being so good, the routing options being so good, the ease of use being second to none, to me, it's a winner. The Fractal FM3, it is an amazing product, and again, as I said in the beginning, if you could only get your hands on one of these and it happens to be the FM3, I don't think you'll be disappointed. However, for me, given the two options, I'm going to be keeping the Quad Cortex and selling the FM3. Thanks so much for watching. I'll probably make another video in another 2 years or however it goes. But in the meanwhile, feel free to check out my other videos and stay safe out there.